I either figured the boss is going to kill me, I was terminally unemployable and was going to have to do this for myself. The average studio owner makes about $32,000 a year. You can make more than that at Home Depot. Well, this little thing called profit is rather important. You have to focus on profit. It's easy to get volume and go out of business. Many companies do because they're chasing volume. It was 4 times their price, but the product we had was very desirable. It was a couple of years of pain to do it, but then we opened the 3rd studio and we went from 0 to 900,000 in 9 months. 900,000 is 3 or 4 times the average studio that's been in business for 20 years. Employees are not to be taken lightly. Employees are very key people to you.
What if you could build a multi-million-dollar business that not only grew revenue-wise, but also gave you back your time and freedom? Imagine creating a real business that operates profitably without your daily involvement. This isn't just a dream, it's exactly what my guest today achieved. Welcome to today's episode of your Business Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Shapiro, and my guest today, David Hilton, started his entrepreneurial journey like many of us, running a single, owner-dependent business, deeply involved in every part of the day-to-day operations. He quickly recognized a fundamental truth. Doing things the same way would always yield the same results. And this realization sparked a quest for a better way, leading him to seek out the best business minds across the country. What David uncovered was a powerful principle that allowed him to change the result. This understanding led to a radical transformation in his photography studio, allowing him to multiply its size 6-fold in the first year alone. Then, he scaled beyond that initial success, navigating the challenges of expanding to multiple locations, ultimately building a business that thrived without his constant presence. He achieved true financial success and the freedom to step away. Today, we're going to dive into David's remarkable journey, exploring the mindset shift that he made, the challenges he overcame, and the precise strategies that allowed him to not just grow, but to truly thrive and gain his freedom. Let's dive in and find out how he cracked the code to scale. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you for the introduction. It's interesting what you were saying there because, I love systems. And even what I did is systematical and it can be applied to almost any small business. Okay, the fundamentals are fundamental at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what business you're in, fundamentals always apply.
Yeah, I think you and I both commonly say the same thing, like, business is business is business. And, you hear from folks, but my business is different. And yeah, sure it is. But also we can solve most of the problems the same way.
Yeah. Or you don't understand my town.
Right? Yeah, but it's different here. So David, before we get to your breakthroughs, scaling, and exit, tell us how you even got into this family business in the first place.
Well, you said a key word there, family business. So my dad had a typical mom and pop photography studio. In high school, I was an okay student, but I wasn't really a motivated student, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do after high school. So off to Rochester Institute of Technology I went. My father had gone there for photography years ago, and went out there and and I enjoyed it, the experience, but I also realized it has to be something bigger. I mean, the average photographer or studio owner in the country doesn't make a whole lot. Okay, and that's a sad truth, and it doesn't need to be true because I've got clients in the photography business and several other businesses, but photography business who make 7 figures net profit each year. So it's possible, but it's rare. But it's a system. It's a process that anybody can do, and it works for all kinds of businesses.
So David, there are a lot of photographers out there. How did you guys differentiate in such a crowded marketplace?
Well, the fortunate news in my particular case is I was going to get out of the photography business, quite frankly, when I realized that this isn't going anywhere. And I didn't have a vision for where I wanted to go. And so I'm starting to look at other kinds of businesses and so forth. And those days was the beginning of the desktop computers, and coming away from mainframe to desktop. And I started to get involved in that. I started to get involved in some manufacturing things, had a degree in a master's degree in education, starting on my MBA. But going through interviews with bosses, I either figured the boss is going to kill me, I'm going to kill the boss. So at the ripe old age of 21, I figured out I was terminally unemployable and was going to have to do this for myself. so nice realization, because that's actually a key point that many people want. Well, I'd like to be in business for myself because I know more than the boss does. Yeah, but the boss knows how to, work day to day and produce income for himself and for his employees. Most people don't. Okay, that's starting place right there, is that, when you're decide to go into business for yourself, you've made a decision that any money you earn is going to come from what you do and not from what you're owed, end quote. So most people prefer a paycheck versus at-risk money. But when you're on your own, you're totally at-risk money. So that's a key piece right there at the very beginning to understand that to be successful. But anyways, I attended a lecture one time and fortunately met a person who ultimately became probably the wealthiest photographer I've ever met. Somebody nobody had ever heard of. He lectured once or twice, maybe 4 times the most ever. In his lifetime, he didn't like lecturing, and I happened to be in one of his lectures, and out of 350 people in the audience, I think I was the only one taking notes. Everybody else thought he was crazy. See, I always took the road less traveled, Jeremy. Okay, if everybody else is doing this, I'm going to do this, go the other direction, and this fellow was doing that. So I didn't copy him, but I got a vision out of him. I said, this guy has 10 studios. Well, it ended up being 14 when he retired, but 10 studios across the West Coast. And I said, if one guy can do it, 2 guys can do it. So that's another lesson here too. If you've seen somebody be successful, if they can do it, I can do it. If you're willing to put in the work, the learning, the suffering, and so forth in the process. The suffering is just a lesson to be learned. That's all. It's not a roadblock. It's a lesson to be learned. Yeah.
When you stepped into the business, what would you say was wrong with the business? Like, it had been successful for years before you got involved, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, we grew up middle class, okay, and got by. We didn't travel a lot, things like that. We traveled locally, and I thought we were doing well, but by today's standards, photographers aren't doing well. Okay, I mean, the average studio owner makes, according to some benchmarks from the National Association, the average studio owner makes about $32,000 a year. You can make more than that at Home Depot. Okay, I wanted to make way more than that. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I have to do something different, because if I did it the way other photographers did it, I'm going to get what other photographers get. That's another important lesson. If you do what other people in your profession are doing, you're probably going to get what they get. And if that's not much, then that you might want to take a different direction.
Yeah. So, given that you didn't like where it was and even where most folks ended up, where was the studio even finding customers? Like, was it growing? Was it steady? Like, were there a lot of repeat customers? Like, how did you guys get growth?
My dad, who was a wonderful photographer, but he would photograph anything. Okay. Somebody wants shoes photographed, which we did have an account that did that. Well, I'm photographing shoes today. Somebody needs a family portrait tomorrow, he's doing that. If somebody else needs a headshot for their business, he's doing that. Somebody needed passports, he's doing that. Somebody wanted a wedding, he's doing that.
Wow. So no specialization.
No. And that's a quick thing I learned out. And through some other people I had met, and again, not people that other people knew or copied. Most of the people I learned from, they didn't care about being known in the profession. They just cared about being successful in the profession. I had to seek them out and find them. And not easy, but it's worth the opportunity. And I didn't have money to do this. If I learned about somebody, I'd call them up and I say, "Can I buy you lunch?" "David, you're over in the Boston area. I'm in California." I said, "Yeah, I'll fly out, buy you lunch." I didn't have money to fly out, but I had to get it together because that's a person I need to talk to learn something to help my vision. Now, this is a really, really key point for everybody. Most people I talk to in business, yeah, I want to build this business so I can make money. That's their idea of a vision. No, no. The money will come if the vision is good, the vision is strong, the vision is something that customers can relate to, and you do that well, then the money flows. The money is not a vision. Money is not a goal. That was a really tough thing for me to get over. Is money is not a goal. Money is a result of doing something well. It's not the goal, though. Okay. Now, yes, I'd like a lot of money, and I might even put a number on it, but it's not going to be the goal. It's going to be the result of doing the right things.
What was it that you were establishing as your goal? Like, how did you take that knowledge and put that into place for yourself?
Well, due to my original mentor, he changed the nature of high school yearbook photography. And that's why everybody in the audience thought he was crazy, because the stuff he was doing, he was copying magazines, and that's not what high school photography looked like at that time frame, years and years ago now. And I said, well, again, one guy can do it. So I started picking up magazines. My dad said, this is crazy. We're going to go broke. I said, well, we're going to do this, or otherwise I'm going to go someplace else. Okay. And he said, okay, I'll work for you. So in my 20s, I'm already my dad switching into working for me. But the kids flocked to us because nobody was doing it. We changed the nature of that whole industry because we saw something different. My friend was on the West Coast. I was on the East Coast, and we just changed the entire status. What senior photography would be today would be a result of the things we did.
Wow. So I'm hearing a few things there, right? One is that you went from this, we'll photograph anything, down to a really, really narrow niche, which was scary for a business owner who had previously gone wide to hear about going deep, but that it worked, right? I'm also hearing that you sought out advisory and mentorship, and that really made a big difference for you as well. I'm curious, David, like, did you find that like just working or hustling harder is what grew the business? How did the hustle factor show up into the growth that you guys had?
Well, I love a quote that Steve Jobs has said, and it's, if you find a vision for yourself that's strong enough, it'll pull you out of bed in the morning. Okay. You don't have to worry about getting up in the morning. You're going to get pulled out of the bed to go, because I want to work on that vision. And my vision that I had for my business lasted the 35 years I built that business. And my goal was to retire when I was 55. I retired when I was 54 and a half. So, okay. But the same vision the whole time, not changing. Okay. And it may have evolved, but it didn't change. Okay. It might get a little bit more perfected, but didn't change. Okay. And you focus on that, and you do that. And if it's different than other people and customers want it, you're going to own the market, which I did.
Love it. So let's talk about that for a moment. You guys niched in, and you got to a point later on where you owned the market, but were you just chasing more sales with the portrait photography, or were you also looking at profitability? Like, was it volume? Was it profit? What was the metrics you were looking at?
Well, this little thing called profit is rather important. Okay, so you have to focus on profit. It's easy to get volume and go out of business. Okay, and many companies do, because they're chasing volume. Okay, that's seldom where it works. Okay, cost of goods sold matters a lot. Our gross profit margin, okay, matters a ton. It's just like Walmart. People say, well, I'm just going to be like Walmart and be cheap. Okay. Walmart has huge gross profit margin because they built a system so they can put products in their store less expensively than anybody else. So Sears tried to match their price. JCPenney tried to match their price. We go out of business because they didn't have the systems in place to put the product in the store at a much lower cost. Okay, so profit is incredibly important, okay, as you're building it, yes. And so pricing has to be appropriate. And my pricing were higher than most all my competitors, but we also, well, first of all, my product was different and the clients wanted it, but we also had to be able to build value why our prices were higher. The sales pitch, marketing, and everything else had to go along with looking like the price we were going to charge.
Love that. So tell me more about what you guys were doing to show that higher value, right? So that there was not just higher perceived value, but real world value that justified, a premium price point.
Well, listen, this would be a deeper conversation that would really go into the high school market, which actually, when I sold the business, we were at the pinnacle of the high school market because the digital was coming online at that time and so forth. We're back in close to 2000 now, so quite a while ago, 2010 actually. And I already saw the peak coming. Most people didn't. Most people thought, oh, this is an awesome business. Let me just get into this. So I was already looking for buyers for my company, and that's a 3 to 5 year process if you want to sell it right. Another discussion if you want to take questions later, on it. But when you can see around the corner and know that the market that's the time to sell. Okay, because other people are saying, oh, this is thriving, and they watch your business, and I know it's time to exit. It's a good time to sell. Yeah, okay, and take the money.
So had you guys not pivoted away from casting a wide net and narrowing down and niching and going a value-based premium price direction, like what would have happened if you didn't change and you stayed the course?
Yeah, you wouldn't succeed. If you think about it, Steve Jobs got fired from Apple. He came back to Apple and they had about 100 products. Within the first month or so, I've forgotten exactly the time frame. You're in Silicon Valley, you probably know better. But when he came back, he made a mandate. We're dropping to 10 products from 100 because he knew that we couldn't do all those. So he had to focus on where the success and the niche for Apple was, and the rest is history, of course. So, yeah. Microsoft's not all things to all people either. They're not trying to be an Apple. Okay. They're doing products really were all designed for companies. Okay. Businesses, not customers, not for individual customers. Apple was much more on the consumer side at the time. They both sort of morphed and come closer together these days, of course, but yeah. So, and you think about, well, Walmart sells all this kind of stuff. No, Walmart focuses on who their customer base is, and they have products for that customer base. They don't try to get, Neiman Marcus's clients to Walmart. Okay. They don't even try to get Target's customers, although Target's, tangentially close to Walmart. They're just a notch up, but that's not where their focus is. Their focus is they know their customer base, and that's who they go for. Because you start going broader than that, the Sears and Roebuck was trying to be something to everybody, and the rest is history, of course.
So it sounds like you learned a lot from that and tried not to be something to everybody, but be everything to someone. And I love that sort of that duality there. So something, David, you and I have talked about in the past is this idea of like, if you're looking to restart growth, do you go after more revenue, more profit, more customers? Like, which direction do you go with all the options that you had available for growth? Like, how did you choose what to implement first to 6x in that first year alone?
If you understand which customers are profitable for you, okay, what can I do with my price level? I mean, obviously the higher price I can charge and have value for my customer, and I can produce the product cheaper. Okay. Let's call it less expensively. Cheaper sounds like, something that's shoddy. Okay. But less expensively. That's giving me the profit margin when I raise my prices. Okay. And that's a key thing because my biggest competitor was $1 billion company. They moved on. They almost gone back. Well, actually, they got sold out. They're almost out of business now. But $1 billion photography business, and biggest in the world. And, but, you know, I was 4 times their price, but I mean, the product we had was very desirable for the kids. Okay. And the kids are the decision makers in that case, mom's the financial, but if the kids want it, that's where they're going. Okay. And we did families and children as well, but we also knew how to beat our competition. So I'd come into a town, when I moved a studio into a new town, there was always a dominant photographer in town, or maybe 2 or 3 that had been there for 20 or 30 years. We were the dominant photographer in the first 9 months because of our marketing also. So not only did we have a great product that we knew and had tested with real customers that they wanted, we also had great marketing to support that, so that, I looked at it. I never study photographers. I study outside of the business. So, for instance, if I'm opening studios, I don't want to see what some other photographer did to open their studio, because it's probably not very good. So, but I look at people like, say, Olive Garden, or somebody who opens a big chain of restaurants or something, or even Home Depot or whatever. I mean, on day one, when they open the door, you can't get a seat in that restaurant, okay, because they've already trained their staff. They've got their marketing in place, et cetera, et cetera. And so on day one, so I learned that. So I said, on day one, when we open a store, we're going to be busy because we've already got a marketing plan in place. We've, decided, getting the leads and things like that. Things are beyond a too narrow niche to talk about today, but I got the leads and so forth to do that. So.
I love that. I have a client that I've done some great work with that opens up gyms. And part of his whole formula for opening up new gym locations is on day one, when it opens, it's already fully booked up. Membership is full. They don't need any new customers. And so they open day one and they're just booked up. And the next order of business is opening the next location. So I love that you looked outside the photography industry at who was full from day one and implemented the strategies. That's really cool.
Well, it's interesting. Let's use the gym one analogy for a little bit. I have a company down the street from where I live here called Planet Fitness. I think they're pretty big, but I think they may be getting close to $1 billion corporation. Planet Fitness. Okay. It's a 24-hour gym. Okay. But, okay, how do they differentiate themselves from every other gym? Okay. Now, I also, I happen to go down to Florida in the wintertime, spend a few months down there. And I have a neighbor down the street, and he drives some very expensive cars. Okay. But he's a one-man gym. He's got his own thing, but he's a trainer, and he trains very wealthy people at a huge amount of money. Okay. So 2 very different models can both exist. Okay, as long as there's a clientele available to them. Okay, it's this fellow down in Vero, moved to a town that was not very, didn't have a lot of money. Okay, average or less American income. He wouldn't have any customers. He's in a neighborhood where people care about that stuff, and there's an audience for him to play with. Okay, Planet Fitness could open up almost in any city because their prices are very low, but they've got a good product.
You've touched, David, on 2 different ends of that spectrum, right? 2 businesses arguably in the same industry, right? But choosing to serve different audiences with value in different ways, very similar to what you did. So not all businesses have figured themselves out and know who they want to serve, and make that same mistake that that you saw of trying to serve everyone. So before you decided to go on the more premium side, had you tried discounting your way to profit? Like, did you guys ever try to be a low-cost provider?
Discounting in my world would be, anybody uses that world, I want to punch them. Okay. Discounting will put you out of business, simply put. Okay. Ways I can combine things, and I can have a special price, but I'm going to make sure my margins are staying. Okay. People think they can discount their way to success. You can't. It's not possible. Now, you say, well, the big department stores do it in January. Okay. Yeah, that's because they've got last year's inventory and they have to get rid of it. Okay. It's still not a really good idea. The ones who have gotten down forecasting is really hard in that business. That's a really hard business. Merchandise, clothing merchandise, particularly because it changes so fast. But the ones who get their supply chain operations down much, much better don't end up with excess inventory in January. Okay. And they can become much more profitable because they're looking at next season stuff ahead of the curve and things like that. So that's very important in that kind of an industry. But discounting, bad word.
I couldn't agree more. And I've learned a fair amount of the math behind that, from our conversations in the past. So that's great. So, okay.
Sometime you'll need to teach them about that math. I could do it with you, but that's a whole nother longer conversation.
I love it. We cover a high level overview of some of the dangers of discounting in the book. So there's some good examples in there. So, all right, David, you guys niche down. We talked about how niching allowed you to specialize and bring in more customers, and that allows you to charge a premium. But once you've done that, tell me more about some of the other changes you made to increase revenue and profitability with those customers and that lead flow of clients coming through the front door.
We had another piece to that as well for the small business people out there, because so many small business people I talked to said, well, David, I could never double my business. I'm already working 12 hours a day. I couldn't work 24 hours a day to double my business. No, the theory is make more, work less. Okay. And we do that by systemization. And systems will set you free. Well, people say, well, no, systems are too rigid. Systems, they're not human. Okay. And so forth. No, not true. Okay. Not true if you design them properly. Okay. A good restaurant chain has good systems. Okay. McDonald's succeeds for a reason. You can go to any McDonald's in the world and get exactly the same product because they have exactly the same system.
You and I have for decades talked systems, and we can do a lot more with that. So without diving too deep into the importance of systemization, all of that, there's one really cool thing you did after you sixfolded the business in 1 year, or 6x'd it. You then went on to open a second location and more beyond that. And one thing you've shared with me in the past is that opening a second location is often what kills most businesses. And you clearly, that was not the nail in your coffin.
It was close. It was close.
What happened when you went to open that second location?
You think you have it nailed when you've got the one building working. Okay. Because you're right there. You're the guy. Okay. Yeah, you might have some help. Maybe you've got a few systems in place, which we did. And you think you've got it. Now I can open a second one. No. Because you're going to quickly learn what systems you don't have, which is probably most of the necessary ones. And so that second business, if you're not careful, if you don't get some good help or advice from somebody who's done it, wipe out a lot of businesses when they try that. I mean, it almost did it to us too. Fortunately, I figured it out, but there was a couple of years of pain to do it. But then we opened the third studio, and we went from 0 to 900,000 in 9 months. In the photography business, 900,000 is 3 or 4 times the average studio that's been in business for 20 years.
And that was just that third studio.
Yeah. And my mentor had told me, Dave, you'll understand it when you get to 5. Thank God I understood it when I got to 3.
So when you're not physically present, how do you ensure that the money is accounted for, operations are consistent, that the experience for clients is the same no matter where they go? Like, what were you doing to provide that consistent experience and allow the studios to run without you physically being there?
First of all, who's overseeing the employees to make sure they're doing their jobs and doing them to the standards of your systems? That's a really key point, because people think of systems, but they don't think of the standards that we need to. If you're going to be top-notch, you've got to have top-notch standards, and people have to adhere to them. So you have to have a measurement system and so forth. Now the other challenge is when you have more multiple location. Now, sometimes you go into a mom and pop restaurant and mama is taking the cash at the cash register. Okay. Because she knows her employees will steal from her. Okay. Dad stays to the end of the night to make sure the back door is locked and nobody's taking all the alcohol out the back door and so forth. Okay. But when you go to studio, business number 2, location number 2, mom's not taking all the cash. Dad's not locking up the door. And we got to make sure the inventory isn't going out the back door. The cash isn't going out the front door, et cetera, et cetera. So those are just other processes. And I had to live through one of those situations in studio number 3, and you get some lessons out of this. Okay. Fortunately, it wasn't so bad to put me out of business, but it was a significant amount of money. One of our what I thought was very, very trustworthy people had worked for me for about 4 years, but something happened in her life and she needed more money. And so a little bit goes out every week. And over the course of a year, a lot goes out. So, and we were able to recover part of it, but not all. But that's a lesson learned. Okay. And I think piece that people are definitely afraid of is you're going to have these setbacks. Okay. You're going to have roadblocks. Okay. You're going to have struggles. Okay. And those aren't stop signs. When people realize that it's not a stop sign, that obstacle in your way, that Ryan Holiday, I think it was, wrote the book, The Obstacle is the Way. Okay. I like the title. The book's pretty good too. But the title says it all. Okay. The obstacle is the way. The obstacle is not a stop sign. It's a little sign on the road say, hey, dude, slow down. You got something new to learn. And if you get that lesson, man, you take off. Because now you know how to break through that, which most people don't.
I love that. I have many of his books. And it's interesting that I think one of the things that's scary for many prospective business owners from starting a business is this fear of failure, this fear of, the problems and challenges and things that come up. And that can, keep you in bed and prevent you from walking out the front door every day because there's not green lights the whole way between here and where you're going. Or you take that first step, right? And understand that you're going to face some obstacles, and that it's okay. You'll learn from them, right? And grow through it. So
you had asked me somewhat earlier, but how much am I working in the business? Now, by the time we get to studio number 3, I opened it as the photographer. Okay. And quickly realized you can't manage 3 studios and be a full-time photographer. Ridiculous concept. Okay. And I also like to be done my work at 5 o'clock, come in at, 9 o'clock, go home at 5 o'clock. My girlfriend still says to me, David, you always work at 5 o'clock. Yep. Why not? Okay. And my goal when I was 40 was to take off a week a month, which I accomplished forever since, at least. It's about training people and then having standards for them to live up to and having a measurement for that standard. Getting into how to do that, we can teach, but that's beyond the scope of what we can do today. But let me go into a piece I've kind of learned about this, the stages of growth, okay, that people are going to go through. And they can be painful, but don't think of them as painful. Think of them as, a super education. Now, the first part I see is it's based on levels of education, even if you will, or abilities to learn. Okay. The first piece is unconscious incompetence. Okay. I don't know what I don't know. The problem with unconscious incompetence, people do think they know it all. Many times. And you can tell it by arrogance. People in that when you see arrogant people, they typically are unconsciously incompetent. They don't know what they don't know. Okay. But if we can get them out of that, then they can begin to learn. So the really learning starts when I become consciously incompetent. Okay. And I call that struggle. Okay. But if I'm willing to seek out sources of learning, your book, okay, my books, etc., getting the right advice and so forth, okay, I can begin to learn. But it's still going to be struggle. I'm still going to hit those obstacles more often than not. But get the lessons from the obstacle, okay? Because then I move up to conscious competence. Now I have to think about it. I have to read the system, the brownie recipe. Okay. but my business is stabilizing now. And then eventually I get to unconscious competence. And this is where you don't really know what you know. You just automatically do it. Okay. There's still systems, but this is just natural. And these people don't really generally know how to teach. It's pretty interesting thing when people like you and me figure out how to teach when we're already consciously competent. That's sort of a different trait. Okay. But now we're at the place of mastery. Okay. And that's what success it really is. And that's the level of getting up the hill that we want to get to. And then really above that is significance. Now I'm doing good for other people too. Okay. I can do good for my community and things because I've got money to be able to do other good things. Do good for your employees. Always treat your employees well. Employees are not to be taken lightly. Employees are very, 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 very key people to you. But here's the other key piece about that whole sort of pyramid of growth is it has to be continuous learning. Because the second you stop learning, the second you stop changing, the second you stop adapting to what's going on in the world, you're going to slide right down to the bottom. It's like chutes and ladders. Okay, because if you're not changing, the world around you is always changing. And we have to pay attention to that world. So continuous improvement is super important at that, especially as you're getting to the upper echelon.
One of the words I love talking about often is this Japanese concept of Kaizen, this like continuous never-ending improvement.
Continuous improvement.
Yeah. And, a lot of folks think that at some point their business will have made it or they'll have made it and they're done. And it's really this ever evolving thing. And before we wrap up, there's actually a quote of yours I love that's sort of around that we'll get to, but we're not there yet. I want to ask, so you achieved this incredible growth. You multiplied the studio 6x in the first year. You expanded to multiple locations. You got the lessons of a 5-studio company when you had 3, right? So you focused on premium pricing, niching, systems, and then you went much further. How big did the business get?
By the time I sold it, we were at least in the top 10 in the country. And there's 30,000 photographers in the country. So, yes. Okay. Was it hard? No, there were a lot of lessons along the way. So some people would call that like hard. No, I didn't think it was hard. I thought it was fun. Yeah. You alluded to it a few times earlier, not on this call today, but I call it the great game of business. Okay. You think about football. Okay. If the team that's behind at the end of the first quarter, the chances of them winning the game are pretty slim, but they can rebound. Okay. Kansas City Chiefs, a year ago, not this year, but a year ago, rebounded. They were really losing, and they went in the locker room and they figured out a plan. Okay. And they motivated themselves to execute on that plan. The other team thought they were way ahead and they got cocky. They didn't plan on continuous improvement and they lost, which isn't normal. Okay. But it still can be done.
I love it. So once you scaled, tell us more about the journey post-scale as you're moving towards the exit, and tell us about the exit.
Well, the end game was, first of all, I'm recognizing it's time to sell because the market's changing so much that I could have adapted the studio to something different, but it would be like turning a aircraft carrier around in, Boston Harbor. No, not going to probably pull it off, okay, without ending up in Logan Airport. But that was in a natural time to sell, okay, and because everybody else thought it was, man, this is, we're riding the high wave. Yeah, you're riding the high wave at the peak. Okay, so, but when you're going to sell, it's not something you decide and you're going to sell next week. Okay, it's a process of now finding the right buyer for your business. It's a marketing process. It's looking for the right customer, et cetera, et cetera. So it's generally, a few year process as opposed to, like put my business up for sale, I'll sell it in a couple of weeks. No, it doesn't. Not usually.
Well, unless you want to fire sale it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've coached a lot of people who are selling businesses. I've helped them sell businesses and things. And, but my first question to them is, what are you going to do next? Because if there's no next, you're going to be very unhappy for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, people who have no next, the longevity is about 6 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. Because people without a purpose don't last long. And so, my next became my teaching, which is, something I've always loved.
So let's talk about that for a moment, David. Based on your journey, right? Not just with your own business, but having worked with thousands of business owners around the world, what's the one piece of advice you'd give a business owner who's feeling stuck, who's feeling plateaued in their business, and trying to figure out how to break through and how to move beyond that?
There's a wonderful person I learned a lot from, Dr. Ellie Goldratt, in the book The Goal and several other good books. Look for the constraint. What's the key thing that's mostly holding up back? It'll always be one. Okay. Think of an hourglass. Okay. If I can widen that little space there, I get a lot more out. Okay. You got to look for that constraint. You start with that. Okay. And you build from there. So what's the next constraint, and so forth. We got to teach them how to manage differently. We got to teach them about what their money is. Okay. I'll do P&L reviews with, many clients and different kinds of businesses. And the owner often is paying their employees to watch them work, and they're not making any money, but the employees are, so that's not good. But we get it corrected. Okay. It takes some work to do, but we've got to educate first. And because oftentimes they'll say, well, I need this. I have to do it this way. No, you don't. There's other ways to do this. Yeah, but it's not the way I do it. I know it's not the way you do it, because the way you do it is what's getting you the result you've got. And you don't want that result. So I have to change how I do it. Change the system, change the results automatically, instantaneously.
I love that. Change the system, change the result.
And it happens instantaneously too. So, yeah.
David, you touched on earlier how important finding mentors was, and you've used that word a few times. I know how important mentors have been, in my career and all, but if you were to restart your whole entrepreneurial journey with everything you know now, is there anything you'd approach differently in terms of finding mentors or your earlier education in the world of business?
I personally love to read, so I'd probably knock up a book a week. I'm a lifelong learner. Somehow accumulated 5 college degrees. So that's not normal and that's not necessary. Okay. But reading is, okay. Finding the right people is, I've never not had a coach. Okay. I can't say never, but in the past 30 years, okay, I still take coaching. Right now it's on advanced AI. Okay. But, so Dr. Ellie Goldratt was a coach of mine for many years. I got to study with him even over in Israel at his office and so forth. So, so I've always been looking to find what I need to know.
Love it. All right. You dropped this quote early in the episode, which I love because it's so you, but I had in my notes here that I want to ask you about a quote of yours that I love, right? And that's about how when you wake up each morning, you get to play the great game of business. And the first time I heard that from you, there was so much packed in just those few words about this being the great game of business. Tell us, for our listeners, more about that mindset and like what it means to you to look at business as a great game versus, I think, how many business owners typically view their business.
And this is something I've taught to some pretty big businesses. I worked at businesses up to even $1 billion businesses, and certainly hundreds of millions of dollar businesses and things like that. And it's always still going to be the great game of business. And sometimes they don't realize it, even at that level. Okay. You take a $15 million business, which is, by the way, in the country, a rare commodity. And the average 90% of all businesses in America are under $2 million. So, when you get into 15 million, you're already getting into rare territory. Never mind when you get into $1 billion. So great game of business. Okay. So think about football, any sport. Okay. But we'll just play with football because I already used that analogy. So we'll stick with it. If even at the Super Bowl game, if 10 minutes into the game, they turned off the scoreboard and told the crowd, we're not going to turn it back on, how much crowd would be left by the third quarter? Because nobody knows what the score is. Nobody knows how many yards they got to go, and nobody's going to hang around for that. Okay, so measurement is important. Have we meaningful goals in different kinds of areas of our business, and are we getting to those goals? Okay, what's our metric today? And one of the things I try to teach most of my clients is win the day, win the week, win the year. Okay, so if I know I need whatever business you have, if I need in photography business, it might be 5 clients a week or 10 clients a week. And, if some other business might need 1,000 people a day, okay, whatever it happens to be, we needed, about 65 or 75 clients a day. Okay. I need to make sure that my lead generation, lead conversion system is getting that done. Because if it doesn't happen today, I'm already losing the year. Okay. And I can know a business, I look at a business in January, February, I can tell them whether they're going to succeed this year or not, and if they don't change. And it's just like in the football game I mentioned, it usually at a quarter, the losing team usually loses. Okay. Not 100%, but by halftime, it's getting even worse. And third quarter, it's getting worse. And now we're down to minutes, so, okay. So we want to know those answers. It's thrilling because now I have a scoreboard.
Well, speaking of, coming down to the end of the game, David, I've learned a ton from you over the decades we've worked together. And even just here on this call, I always am jotting down good notes from our conversation. So what I'm hearing, and to recap for our listeners, is that you stepped into an established but poorly performing family business. You 6x'd it in the first year and then grew to one of the top 10 in the country and made a very high 7-figure exit. And getting unstuck came down to focusing on getting more customers first, and then generating more revenue and profit with your customers and incoming leads, specifically through premium pricing and niching, and reducing the cost of goods sold.
To those new customers, I'm very important. Message, market, match. I've got to know the customer I want, and I've got to give them the message they want.
Huge. I love it, David. And for our listeners who want to learn more about you or connect, where should they go?
If they message me on LinkedIn, I've got 2 books published right now. I've got 2 more soon to come. You've got them right there in back of you, I think. Spark. Yeah. Okay. So if you go on Amazon and you just type in the word Spark and the word Hilton, you'll come up with that book. And the other book is not on Amazon, but it's with Dan Kennedy, and it's The Ultimate Success Secret, co-authored. And if you message me on LinkedIn, I can sell you those 2 books for just postage. Okay, so it'll be $7.95.
Love it. And if you're looking for David on LinkedIn, you'll find him by looking for David Hilton. His username there on LinkedIn is David A. Hilton, and we'll of course have all that in the show notes. David, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been great. I always love our conversations and come away feeling wiser and supported. So thank you for taking the time.
I wish everybody the success of their dreams, and it can be done. It can be done. Okay, but change is necessary.
Love it.